That's great.
Jill, maybe do you want, I'm happy to share a little bit about the history and just where we're at with Dragonfly cafes if you want.
Sure. Gabi, does that sound good for Kevin to get started? Okay, cool. Yeah, go ahead.
So just welcome folks. This is this thing we call the Dragonfly Diversity Cafe. It's kind of holding both those names, Dragonfly and Diversity. And really, I mean, it's an opportunity to, the idea of the cafe is that it's kind of this informal gathering, and it's been these sort of, you know, smaller groups where we can kind of just be a little more relaxed and cozy and have a conversation about things that really matter. So it's awesome that Tanner's here to share his work, and we'll hear more about him in a moment. But I would just encourage everyone to keep getting the word out about this. And if you have ideas for speakers, you want to get involved, you want to, you know, do anything, there's a student group, there's so many ways you can get involved, and just keep sort of talking it out. And also, this is meant to be more of an interactive thing, so we will be using the chat, and also if you want to just like raise your hand with a little, somewhere here you can raise a hand. There's different ways you can, and we'll have some time at the end for you to talk as well. So yeah, I'm super excited. It's been so cool to see this emerging. So.
Yeah, I'd have to follow up with Kevin. He's absolutely right. These have been a great way to learn about the different types of work that's going around, especially in our Dragonfly community. So if you do have anyone that you'd want to bring, let us know. I'll go ahead and start off by just describing Project Dragonfly. Well, my name is Gabi. I'm a current AIP Bronx Zoo student, and I'm part of our new Project Diversify group. And my cultural background is Jamaican, and I'm a first-generation American and graduate student. Project Dragonfly has opened up their arms to help me through some coursework, and, you know, like just having like that group to talk to. We are a cooperative of students, alumni, faculty, and staff who have a common focus on supporting each other and our underrepresented minority Dragonfly community. And our goal is to improve diversity, equity, and inclusion within Project Dragonfly and the greater field of conservation. We're hoping to come together to confront topics of conservation science and education that intersect with social justice. So, for instance, colonialism, climate justice, environmental justice, and how representation is represented in our field. So to do this, we offer multiple opportunities for our groups to engage in this type of cooperative. And these opportunities include attending the Dragonfly diversity cafes, providing curriculum support through a working group, and then offering a network of support or mentorship. This group is open to underrepresented members, sorry, my dog, members and allies within the Project Dragonfly Miami of Ohio programs. And while we're allies to each other in many ways, this group has a special focus on providing support for our underrepresented members. So we'll be centering this community in our conversations, in our leadership, and our action. We are a safe space and hope that you will join us as we further our DEI efforts within our program and the conservation field. So to participate in our network, Jesse will be pasting a link in the chat to find our Facebook group. I also would like to introduce Dr. Shaftan Kaul, I'm so sorry, who will be providing an overview of our support network.
Thanks, Gabi.
Yeah.
So I'm standing in for Chandler Sharp, who's a graduate of the GFP, and all in all awesome dude, currently at Dallas Zoo. And he's helping and leading essentially the network of support that the Project Diversify group, student group that they're trying to get going. And the idea is to be a source of networking and support for other URM underrepresented minority students and allies in our program. So if you indicate your interest in the Google link for the Google form that Jesse posted, we can put you in touch and would love to have your support.
That's me. Hi, everyone. I'm Celeste, and I'm an AIP student with Project Dragonfly, and my local institution is the Woodland Park Zoo in Seattle. Just wanted to make a couple of announcements for this cafe. We're excited that you can join us, and during our group conversations, if we could please be present for each other and keep our cameras on if you can. Please ask questions in the chat at any time. During the group discussion, you can type in the chat or let Dr. Jill Korach or Gabi know if you have a question. We can also ask them for you, just let us know. Thank you.
Thanks, Celeste. We're so happy you're all here. I'm Jill Korach. I get to work on our global field programs and do graduate advising for Dragonfly. Got to know Gabi through this, so I'm really excited for that and the Diversify group. Glad you're here and glad you're kind of helping us to push things forward in a good way. I think what's neat about this is the fact that we get to come together around shared interests, and hopefully they make us think deeper about kind of the individual collective actions that we can all do. But my job is actually to introduce my friend Tanner, yes, who's here tonight. I'm gonna be sure I look at my notes occasionally to know that I've hit all the main points. But Tanner's a great person to talk about these topics, as you may have seen from the invitation. He has been really working hard since I met him during his undergraduate years a million years ago. And the neat thing is Tanner was in a program, this really innovative program that allows you to learn restoration skills while you're in undergrad. So you leave with job skills. And from that point on, I feel like Tanner has only been on this sort of upward trajectory that whole time. He's a Peace Corps service volunteer in Thailand. He focused on ecotourism. He came back to the Cincinnati area and then worked on the Tri-State Trails Coalition, which is a really cool Cincinnati-based program looking to kind of focus on both equity and community. You can tell I'm not looking at my notes anymore, obviously. And from there, he's just continued to win awards, National Park Service, Swift Leader, Emerging Leader Award. So just very clearly using his leadership skills for conservation in the right ways. And I think that's been really noticed. So now Tanner serves as the co-executive director of Groundwork Ohio River Valley. So right here in our River Valley region. And I think he does work in such a way that you all will just really enjoy what he has to say tonight. I really liked how you described yourself, saying that your passion is creating new pathways for urban youth to access green careers. Because I think many of us are thinking about, it's cool, we're all here, but how do we change, how do we add more faces and more dynamic to all of this? So his title for tonight is Untangling Equity and the Environment. Please help me welcome Tanner.
Woo, yeah, thank you. Yeah, look at all that. Excellent. Thank you all so much. I'll echo a couple things about the safe space and messing up. And if I get through my slideshow without interruption, that's a big failure for me. So please stop, and we can zoom through it or we can take our time. It does not matter. I want to make sure that we twist and meander to the topics that are of interest, and that you have the opportunity to ask questions, challenge me, and vice versa. And do it safely and supported. I'm sure and believe that all of us here came with that ethic tonight. So thank you for the time. I feel really happy and privileged to be with you, especially since I've just learned that there's people from all over the place, not just friendly faces from Southwest Ohio like Molly and Jill, but we are spread out throughout the country and potentially beyond. So all that being said, sometimes I talk really fast, keep up. Let's get into this. Okey-doke. So a snazzy title, as Jill said. Let's talk about what that really means, because so much of what we do here in the Groundwork Network is kind of demystify and deconstruct the jargon, which I really don't care about. This is not a woke police presentation. if that's what you're here for, we might have a long night. I and the ethic behind our organization are behind action, given all the things that we talk about when we talk about inequities, and the fact that equity in the environment and housing, climate change, and public health and asthma, and all of these things are inextricably linked, and we can no longer think of them as separate in any facet of our society. So all that being said, a lot of what we are going to talk about tonight is identity, because I think it hits home so hard with our culture of conservation, if you will, or sustainability. And learning from the small group today with the Diversify group beforehand really helped me hone in on what we're talking about and what's important to you all as a community. And a big thing is, rightfully so, representation. And that's a big deal as it relates to funding. It's a big deal as it relates to sustainability. It's a big deal as it relates to conservation in every way. And I want to introduce myself a little bit by talking about identity and getting into my story somewhat, and why I'm here was because these things never really mattered to me. I spent the early part of my childhood in the Caribbean, and diversity was just something that came with that. I grew into a staunch conservationist because growing up, we did not have much, but what we did have, we spent on hiking and camping and canoeing excursions, maybe because they were just cheap, but also because my parents had a deep connection to nature. So I knew I wanted to champion conservation, and I went away. I lived on fishing boats for months at sea. I was in the woods counting fish. I was personally nourished. I was super selfish and alone. And I was really great with that. I became a published scientist and so forth in the fisheries fields, and went on to grad school, and finally had a Peace Corps service experience. And Peace Corps is one of those things that has all sorts of goods and bads attached to it, and a lot of make what you will of it, and a lot of variables. But for me, the epiphany came there, living on a raised wetland in southern Thailand that the people depended on for substance, for food, also for all sorts of economy. But we're also in a really bad cycle of polluting the resource that they depended on. I think we know and have seen this all over the world, including our own. And so we came up with interventions that also had economic ties to them. And at this point, I realized that all of this conservation stuff that I was interested in went nowhere if it was not translated in science, if it did not reach people and their values. And that's how we now go about doing everything we do here at Groundwork. And that translation and that value proposition is the step that comes after just knowing who you're trying to reach. And that's the first and foremost thing. So I get in identity and culture, and I show these two pictures because these are two pictures that I couldn't feel more familial with. If you see me over here on your left, I'm number 2 there. I kind of look like a Thai dude. I blend right in. And that was a big shock going from where I lived after the Caribbean, which was in Eastern Kentucky, as the only person of color in my high school, and this minority to majority experience, which helps me so much today, because when you go from one to the other and you go into a place where you're just as brown as everybody else, and you feel immediate trust, doors open for you that never did before, or that took a lot more time. Life is easier. It was amazing, right? Especially once I got some language skills down, I could blend in, I could do things that I never did. And again, positives and negatives with that. But that experience and that leveling of the playing field, that gaming the system, those experiences informing how we disrupt and shake things up here at Groundwork, fed into the culture that we now create. And you see on your right, which is my favorite picture in the world of all of us, young to old, me being the old man there, and how we approach conservation issues through the Groundwork Network and here in the Cincinnati area, Northern Kentucky and Southeast Indiana included. So hopefully I've built some cachet with you all throughout that. Let me talk about why our model is pretty important here. And I think everybody's going to know all these things. We live in cities, they're diverse. You know, I bet almost everyone here, a lot of people are familiar with the Green 2.0 report. If you're not, it is a report that you can just Google. It's kind of championed by Dorcetta Taylor at the University of Michigan, who's a big hero of mine and in the industry. And the environmental movement, organizations like organizations of academia, nonprofits, government institutions are super not diverse, right? And we cannot do conservation work if we're not doing diversity work, period. It's in the statistics. Climate change, as we know, is layered on top of layered, just another thing that is disproportionately affecting, especially our low income and/or communities of color. And you pair that when we're talking about this pipeline that we spoke about in the small group earlier. We're looking for more diversity here at the top. We're looking around at our academic institutions or our National Park Service and say, hey, Tanner, why aren't there more diverse candidates here? Well, number one, you're probably not looking in the right places. Number two, there's a big gap between us up here and what it takes to foster an ethic of conservation or sustainability towards the bottom. Integrated urban environments and the places where folks live that are impacted by them the most are no accident. They're bred out of decades of racism, segregation, redlining, housing policy, zoning, transportation policy, et cetera, right? So part of my personal epiphany and revelation is pairing all this planning and urban design stuff with sustainability, with social activism, with the justice equity work. And how does that especially relate to a young person? Imagine if your backyard is not one of splendor and greenery, it's one of a public health hazard and a place you're told never to go, either because there are police roaming or because the water will burn your skin or because people are drowning in the river behind your house. How do you form a healthy relationship with nature in those environments? Well, you change it up. So that's what we do. This, you know what, y'all, I think everybody's down with it. But for some people, some audiences, it strikes a nerve. But again, you cannot be a conservationist without being an advocate for diversity and representation, right? I'll move on quickly from that. I want to get into a little bit about Groundwork. You all are academics, you love acronyms and so forth. Groundwork USA is a 21 city network. Years ago, as part of the National Park Service centennial autopsy, if you will, their plan, I believe in the 2000s, earlier than that, they realized they weren't connecting with all these 80% of people in urban areas, right? Not all cities like Rocky Mountain National Park have an affiliated urban center like Denver. And I'm so jealous of Groundwork Denver because I have the Taft House here in Cincinnati, right? It's a national park unit that's this big, very small, if you can see me, and his old house where an old white dude lived, who was really cool and important, but it doesn't really connect with a lot of our youth. So that's our National Park Service unit. The National Park Service, they realized they weren't connecting with urban residents. They and the US, they went over to, Great Britain, and they took a model called Groundwork. Maybe you're familiar, in the UK, Groundwork is the largest environmental nonprofit network over there. So they brought it back and it's huge in Great Britain. Also now we're expanding into Kenya, Japan, and a couple other countries. They brought it back and they decided to start a Groundwork network in cities, especially post-industrial kind of Rust Belt cities, if you will, like Cincinnati. And because they wanted to funnel, they were able to funnel funding through the US EPA's Brownfield office. So that's just, you all, I'm sure know, classic polluted land, brownfields, changing that into something not polluted. And then we go farther saying, changing it, thinking about the results of gentrification first, changing it with engaging your communities first, talking about priorities first, and not creating hope or what may lead to displacement, et cetera. So the Brownfield Assistance Office kind of funds some of Groundwork. We are all our own independent 501c3s. However, and most of what I do is fundraising, and we are here again in Cincinnati as part of Groundwork Ohio River Valley. And just focusing and zooming in on us, again, it's the urban environment. It's those left behind by the conservation movement, right? We joke most of the watershed organizations and environmental nonprofits care more about the flora and fauna and the bugs and so forth than they do the humans living next to these places or not. Getting into justice a little bit before we really set the stage about what we're talking about. It's a buzzword, right? Equity and justice and all these things. What does it mean? I don't, care about the lexicon or the jargon. I care about the meanings behind the words and the actions affiliated. But it is important to make some distinctions here because we're throwing this word around a lot. Justice, justice this, justice that. Your organization has a DEIJ statement and we have a plan for this. What does it mean? And if we're not really talking about it, if we're not talking about budgets and we're not talking about actual curriculum, then I don't think it goes very far. So distributive justice, something we're going to go to in a second. We work a lot on procedural justice, which is with our public institutions especially, but everything is small scale as a neighborhood or a community organization to city government, right? To state government, to federal government. Procedural justice is lacking, excruciatingly so, because of all of these historical inequities. And it's so hard to break out of what we want to get into from these systems, if we're still having the same structure and the same constraints because of our governments are based on 200-year-old philosophies and decision-making criterion. And please stop me at any time if chats come in, I just can't see them. And then sense of recognition is really important, a little more meta in a lot of what we do with our youth and our community members around changing the places, changing the lives and the systems in the neighborhoods that we live. So your academics, right? We blend all these things together. Conservation work is justice work. And to go a little further and to get a little more layman and out of the stratosphere, what I do with my experience, what I do with our organization, our staff experience, and say, well, how can we boil down justice, equity? Sometimes, often, and what we know we do well, because I'm not the biggest fan of capitalism, for example, but if that's the system we're in, we're going to get in there, shake it up, and outcompete everybody. That's what we do. And so when we boil down equity, we talk about income and opportunity. It's an easy way to link stuff to what people care about, income. And for our ethic and for our sensibilities, often that's green infrastructure, that's reclaiming vacant lot, that's flipping brown fields. And then the opportunity is the privilege I had as one parent being a physicist and one being a chemist. I knew about science and so forth. Our kids don't have often, and not always, but don't have this innate connection to know, oh, there's a nonprofit down the road and I'm interested in doing things outside, and that can hook me up with a an internship and so forth. So we level the playing field in that respect. Getting into procedural justice, and this is where I say for you academics, I want to talk about how this is data driven and data justified. And more than that, arming ourselves as citizens, as change makers, with language, with data that people have to listen to. So we have something called climate safe neighborhoods, which informs all of our work, all the good, especially green jobs and youth employment stuff that I'll get into. And it helps us to prioritize why and where we're doing stuff. Again, it's no longer good enough to say we planted 100 trees. We planted 100 trees in the richest neighborhood in the city, right? Who already had a great tree canopy coverage. We use all of this stuff to prioritize what we do. So here's some examples. What's really cool is some of our youth get to work with NASA on this stuff. This is the city of Cincinnati. We're working on building out into the county and in northern Kentucky. There are cities throughout the Groundwork network that are part of this climate safe neighborhood cohort funded by the Kresge Foundation. So on your left, you see surface temperatures. Red is hot, blue is not as hot. And some of, especially, we'll get into the social and the demographics later, but some of especially the more lower income neighborhoods in our city can be up to 25 degrees hotter than other neighborhoods on a summer day, right? And then you layer that with impervious surfaces and tree canopy, right? It's directly correlated right there. So, but we have to go further. So again, working with NASA, working with GIS, institutions that do our mapping around the region, and then having our kids go out with the tablets and with the air monitors and using their own GIS skills on the ground, measuring surface temperature, and looking at basically particulate air matter, we can come up with these heat vulnerability indexes. See, something might be happening in the chat, so just stop me. For example, the neighborhood that I'm sitting in right now, if you can see my mouse right here, is Lower Price Hill. It basically has no trees. It has a small circle here, which means household income is less than $40,000 a year, and it's super red, which also means it's really hot. So now we're layering all of these issues, and we go on and on with that. And I want to break out to it for a second, because I would encourage you to go check this out. Some cities have something like this, some don't, but this is the city of Cincinnati. Ooh, sorry. And what I have right now is air toxins. We've got all this data from indexes all over the country, and then again working with federal institutions and local institutions. And you can go about comparing stuff, social and environmental issues. Something really interesting. Urban renewal in 1948. That's basically demolition of areas and setting up for projects, right? What do those neighborhoods look like now? What is the racial migration patterns in Cincinnati? We're going back to the census from the 1930s here, and you can see especially African-American populations that are just kicked out of the center of the city. And now you see that playing out with the gentrification downtown, et cetera. Let me turn off and get a couple other things here. course, you have median household income. You pair that with tree canopy. Some fun things, if you're a planner, is we've been able to digitize zoning maps from the 1925. Blue areas are kind of what were the heavy industry, and now you have lower housing stock. You have classic environmental justice conditions where sewer treatment plants are located in, of course, lower income and or minority communities. You have dumps and landfills. You have, here in Lower Price Hill, a number of years ago, a factory literally exploded in everybody's backyard. And their high school mascot is the Mad Hatters, which is a relic from the days when they were working with toxic chemicals that made them potentially go loony. And that's one of the environmental legacies here in the neighborhood. Ironically, Cincinnati does not have a redlining map. It's been hidden. So we're in the search for it. We're in the archives downtown at the library, and we know it's out there for sure, but it would be great to have that data as well.
I posted a question in the chat.
Yeah, go ahead, Gabi. Thanks.
Yeah, I'm actually curious. Is there data from this map in other cities?
Yes. So a lot of that data exists publicly. It's just not aggregated the way that we did, and having this cool pseudo government status that we have, able to work with the NASA satellites as well, which gives us a lot of those measurements, which is really cool. So that data is there. It's just super hard to find. With the Climate Safe Neighborhood Partnership, you can find the 10 or so groundwork cities, and I believe there's one in New York, I was talking about Yonkers a while back, that have kind of a similar dashboard to what we have. So if you just Google Climate Safe Neighborhoods Groundwork or something, you can find it all. All that to say, that's a big part of what informs our work and why we do the things where we do them. Digging a little deeper, getting into what the actual change looks like, I want to go back to the Green 2.0 report. I won't read all of this for you. We as an industry, as a movement, aren't doing great with diversity, right? It's no surprise. The worst part is that a lot of studies show that folks of color often have deeper roots and connections to the environment, depending on their society and where they come from. It just has more recently become a stereotypical white space that, for those of you out there, I've been called a coconut how many times by my family. You got Oreos, you got bananas, etc. Brown on the outside, right, white in the middle, right? Because I like to paddle and ride my bike a lot. So that's funny, not funny thing. And what it does is create all of these perceived or real barriers, not only for you or me or whoever within their families, but also in the media and society. And it's another hard thing to get over. Just drawing it out here, the Green 2.0 report did an assessment of all of these different industries, again, government agencies, NGOs, foundations, and this is where I'm so proud about Groundwork. We're a BIPOC-led network, individually and together, and we have pretty great numbers as it relates to diversity, but this is not an encouraging part. And again, it is directly tied to sustainability and conservation because of just straight up population dynamics. We're not going to spend a super amount of time.
Chat.
Yep. Sorry.
Perry, would you like to ask your question?
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah.
I wanted to know, you mentioned that Groundwork was also establishing staff in other countries. Would you repeat those other countries where Groundwork is? Yeah,
thanks for asking. There are probably even many of them before us here in the US. The main one is in Great Britain. They're all spread throughout the UK. But the newer ones are Kenya and Japan.
Perfect, thank you.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And there was talk of Puerto Rico recently too, but I think it's pretty nascent. Thanks for interrupting, Gabi. So let's get back to this idea of identity. We've got these columns, we've got some clarifiers, and in the center we have kind of a centered identity. I've made this for Cincinnati, but it spreads out to a lot of the US, right? Although it can be very different. and then marginalized. And there's stuff missing from here. Go shout it out if you have it. This is kind of a broad strokes, but when you look at the conservation, the culture of conservation, you know, usually centered identities are what show up, and that's why we love to champion women in science, LGBTQ, of course, race, and even things like that aren't out here. What kind of things play into your identity and how you're perceived or how you think you're perceived in conservation? Housing status can do that. You know, are you a renter? Are you a homeowner? What does that mean? So many of our youth who live in public housing, no fault of their own, have never picked up a hammer, because when something goes wrong, you call somebody, you have to wait 3 weeks, you can't touch it to get it fixed. And when we do things like construction projects, trail bridges, or energy efficiency work, it's so important to build these skills. And I put this up here, this is kind of a different topic, if you will, but it always helps me, ironically, to center myself around what's going on, to just think about the people that you know or don't know, and their backgrounds, and even what it means presenting versus how you feel inside, which is a huge difference. So the big part here is that the centered identities form the dominant culture, right? If we're talking about sociology. And you saw what it was and what I perceive it to be in Cincinnati and like many other places around the country. With the question being, how do we start to change dominant culture to be more inclusive? Because inclusivity makes us stronger, straight up. And what we work with a lot of land agencies, we like to get our youth and young adults working with park services, working with private companies, for-profit companies, green infrastructure, energy efficiency, and you know, they're all very homogeneous. So we try to prep and go in with a shared language about cultural humility and basically learning from a person what they want you to learn from them, right? And you find more connections than not, because with everything as polarized as it is around our country, it's hard not to look at surface value stuff. So how do we do that? And I'm going to get in, you know, to the good stuff and the warm and fuzzy for Groundwork. Again, a lot of income generating programs. We talked to Molly about this at the zoo, and some shared values we have there among reaching out into neighborhoods in a more value proposition way, in a more sustainable way, as far as connecting what we do to what people care about. Most everything we do is paid experiences, especially for kids. They're improving themselves, but they're also improving public land, which we're making their connection to because they own the damn thing, right? And there's no better connection to land than if you steward it. And it's our duty to steward, you know, that land that is now passed on from Native Americans to whatever our culture looks like in the city that you're at, to steward it and care for it, and to earn a living from that potentially. All sorts of great outcomes and so forth. Appreciation of nature is just a big thing, because our goal is not to create an army of environmental scientists, right? Hopefully some of them go on to be with Dragonfly, but it's just not going to be everyone's route. But if you come out with a more informed ethic, you as a voter, you as someone who as a youth has a family, then has networks and tendrils beyond that in your community and your school, and you're becoming an advocate and a change maker as a young person, there's no better voice, right, for what we do. And then we step up and we offer high wage jobs as far as our young adult urban conservation corps. And they do things like plant 4,000 trees a year, restore 76 acres of public space just last year, do a shit ton of beautification aesthetic work in the process, because we can't always say to a community, care about this stuff, but it looks like crap, but nature really likes it, right? There has to be an entry, whether it's recreation or beautiful flowers or whatever it is, I don't care, and layered benefits. So this is kind of the environmental legacy we have now in Cincinnati, in Toledo, in Richmond, California, right? Where we've done a number on Mother Nature, and how do we bring it back equitably and for everyone. So this is just last year. I'm really lining up for some of that green stimulus money, right? Because we can do 10 times this much. We'll see how that happens. We'll see what happens here. And then we never say we plant a tree without getting a diploma or a driver's license. We've had a long journey in workforce development, and what I've learned is that workforce development often takes someone in, churns them up, produces someone for whom there is no job. And we've avoided a lot of big opportunities because we don't want to have those kind of shackles. We want to be able to know the individual. We want to say, oh, you need a driver's license, we can help with that. You need daycare, we can help with that. What are the things you're interested in? How can we help you move on and into a better place with a green industry career? And then the network is so big. Again, we talked about that leveling the playing field. So huge to meet people like you, for example, everyone on this call, right? I won't read all this. These are two of my favorites. I won't read it because I'll start cracking. My voice will start cracking here. But the outcomes are, for example, Anna here going to Berea University in the sustainability field after a very tough background. Something that's super new and fun is Amaya in this picture was selected just a couple weeks ago. One of over 600 applicants nationwide to go to be selected for Yellowstone Youth Conservation Corps. So that's pretty cool. She's gonna be spending the summer in Yellowstone. And you can read these things. And if you're really into it, you can check out all our promotional stuff and donate to us, of course. But I like
Tanner,
to add,
there's a question in the chat.
Yeah, sorry.
From Kevin. He's
Yeah, I was
asking
just-
if, go ahead.
That is graduation from high school.
Okay.
Kevin. Yeah, thank you. Often our young folks don't go to college, and that's one of the reasons we created the young adult workforce, because it hooks them up with higher education, whether that's community or technical school or labor unions, and then arms them with all these certifications like the National Green Infrastructure Certification Program, OSHA, first aid, herbicide use, chainsaw. So you have this great higher ability, soft skills, and technical skills for field work or even greenhouse work and energy efficiency. So right, I kind of culminate here without saying into this new Green Deal of the future or whatever it's going to look like. That is a great policy outcome, but if it's not equitably distributed on the ground, and we're losing a lot of this as it goes from federal to state to city through politicians, blah, 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 and line items and this and that, we're not going to accomplish it because sequestering carbon and so forth anymore, or getting rid of the carbon load can't just be done out in forests. It has to help those neighborhoods that are impacted by it most. So I'm going to stop talking. And here's all my stuff if anybody wants it. Thank you all for the time and for giving me the mouthpiece.
Tanner, that's awesome. Thank you. We'll just, yeah.
Thanks.
Thank you, Tanner.
Thank you. Yeah.
Yeah, let's open it up. Our whole thought is that we can have a conversation from here. So like Gabi said, if you want to put them in the chat, if you want to just raise your hand, I'm sure we'll be able to manage folks being able to talk for the next few minutes, definitely. And it looks like, Jesse, do you want to ask your question?
Yeah, so I had a question. I just wondered if Groundwork does any type of like tracking on how the program affects like the participants. And
Yeah.
I know it's difficult because they're high school.
Yeah.
I worked with a similar program and that was something we didn't do and we're hoping other people did.
For those of you, right, with nonprofit experience, especially, and outcomes are so important for funding and so forth. And we know it can't just be anecdotal, and we know we have to have this and that. So how do we track them? We get on TikTok and Snapchat and whatever, right? Because you seriously, that's why I'm laughing, because that's how I have to keep up with some of my people. But so that's why I put those kind of two examples at the end of Amaya and Anna, because a lot of what we see, are they going on to environmental science majors like those two young ladies? Sometimes, probably less than 25%. But what they're doing is being productive humans for themselves and taking on whatever ethic of what they learned from our program and other support that they may have had on with them.
So I have a question, Tanner. I'm Chris. This is Lynn. We're with Project Dragonfly. And first of all, this is great. We love what we're doing. And one thing it made me think about with early in Dragonfly, we were doing a participatory, like kids publishing their own, science magazine. So they would write for their science magazine. And we purposely, we had thought like we would have like a magazine for young scientists. And we decided actually, even the word science has been so ruined in school. We ended up shifting that, because we thought it would already turn people off, and had, a magazine for young investigators, and that seemed to work better for us. But I'm also, with the AIP and GFP, we use the word conservation a lot as well. But sometimes, especially when we're thinking about DEI issues, I'm worried about that word also being kind of laden and having a lot of baggage associated with it. And then when I think about what you're doing with both science and conservation, so I just wondered what you thought about that, and if you had I guess what I'm asking is really what the youth who are getting involved in the program, how are they identifying with that program? What do they see of themselves, and what kinds of messages do you use that you think really resonates with them?
Yeah, there's two parts, and I even will call out Celeste too, because we're having a great conversation about just the language behind invasive species, right? Because as scientists and conservationists, so much we work with. I'm super sensitive to the immigrant experience, for many reasons, and to call out something invasive is crazy. So number one, you got to make it cool, right? Like, straight up, like this has to be something. And the amount of applications we get for our jobs, which we're hoping to have 100 positions filled this year, it's going to be more than double, because it's cool. You make money, you travel, you do cool stuff. You don't have to be on your toes all the time. And you're proud of what you do. That type of stuff, as I call the brainwashing, right? The being proud, the stewardship, finding out that you can have professions in conservation or science or whatever, that comes later. It's the part of the hook through demand, through a little bit of exclusivity, through the people who are our youth leaders and our staff are people who have come through our programs or a similar life experience and can connect with the young people that we want to connect with. So that's like door number one to open. And then afterwards, after you get in and you experience all these things, that's when the real fruit of the labor comes up. And we're still, we're not perfect, and we're still, again, back to this invasive species conversation. There's all sorts of terminology that is just properly scientific that shouldn't have all these attachments to them, but they do. And so we're constantly working on that. And we don't talk about climate change and green infrastructure and so forth that much. We talk about how the work that we do is connected to the things people care about, whether it's income generation and flooding basements or really hot days in the summer, and solutions to those things, whether it be policy or like breaking ground, right, on stuff. So it's a good question. Thank you for that, Chris.
Thanks.
Yeah, I see a Department of Transportation fun question. I won't put. Yeah.
Yeah, so my question was, I was thinking about Pete Buttigieg because he was recently put on as the Secretary for Transportation, but the guy is a genius. So I was like, he's gonna probably think of this already. So I came across this article and it already passed for like applications, but I'm just wondering, for a group like Groundwork, do you also have like I guess like all of those government folks, like government relations that go and talk to all staffers and like find the monies?
Lobbyists. yeah,
in-house people.
Right. That's the problem with like do-gooders like us. We're not super cutthroat when it comes to that type of thing when we need to be, right? And that's why I talk about mixing it up in the free market. I think we definitely have that spirit. So as it relates to transportation, let me tell you something really cool. Through some of this climate safe neighborhoods work, measuring particulate matter 2.5, especially along the highways, we've been able to map out and prioritize places in neighborhoods near highways that have really bad air quality. And so, yeah, you go in and plant a tree, not enough. It's working to design a space with the community and then having, for us in this example, youth employees and young adult employees being the installers, working alongside the Ohio Department of Transportation and their contractors and making those potential job linkages or relationships. So that's how we have interacted with the Department of Transportation so far. Other groundworks across the nation, I think, have had better success. I always joke about our California groundwork. I don't even think they're living in a different world. They have all sorts of different laws and policies and funding that we are not going to have anytime soon. So it's a big array of what the regime in your city or state is at the time. And again, hoping for the new administration to start flowing some funding and some intention into these things is my big job right now, getting into that kind of lobbyist mode, right? Quite frankly, because we have to have them know that we're here and ready to go already. Go ahead, Chef Cat. You're muted.
Jill, were you going to jump in? I'd be glad.
Yeah, sorry.
Sorry.
I had to unmute myself. Just adding a follow-up question to what Chris was asking. So your program is so, I think, sorry, I don't want to steal your pun thunder, but it's so groundbreaking in many ways. So
right.
At the same time, I was wondering if you've heard any anecdotal or if the students have shared anything with you that they felt this perceived barrier in getting in the field.
So much.
How your program has sort of helped them overcome this perceived barrier.
So much, all the time, excruciatingly so. And that's the, that's the part of my job that's talking to parents all the time and like building the trust that it takes to have success in the neighborhoods that deserve it most, is just working with families, working with community councils and all that stuff. And again, forgive me, the Diversify small group, but things like, I'll repeat myself here. Things like, my mom doesn't consider this a real job because we're outside all the time. Usually are, fine with, because it's income generating, but not always, just because of the stigma. And in many neighborhoods too, for example, here in Lower Price Hill, if you graduate or not, often you go work on the docks, right? Down on the river, straight up. There's a large urban Appalachian legacy here too, and it's connected to coal even. But the other day in the greenhouse, Molly and I were in there, there's one of our youth employees named Ron. He was telling me how hard it was for him to explain this to his family and so forth, and how much money he could make just hustling on the street, selling drugs or whatever, and what it's like to have a pocket of cash and able to move something like that. And we're looking at the greenhouse, and he was explaining to me how nice it was to be here and how meditative it was. We do some self-care at the beginning of every day, but as all of you know, just being in nature outside has an additional component. And so what I was able to say was like, dude, look at that pallet of seeds over there. Every one of those cells is going to be worth $10 or $12 or whatever it is here in a couple months that you can go out there and hustle with. Right. So it's the same ethic. I say this about young brown men and people of color. And that's you got to harness the hustle, because you got it. You've been doing it in your own way, whether you're like a woman of Asian descent or a person of color in any way. Like there's a special amount of hustle there that you got to harness. And we like to embrace that. And one of the big things that we do against the deficit-based culture, which is I haven't seen my dad forever. I don't have a car. My mom doesn't like what I do, is like, yeah, all that sucks, bro. Like straight up, that sucks. You're going to have to work twice as hard. You're going to have to do all this extra stuff, but let's talk about the strengths that you have, even the lesser strengths. And let's capitalize on that, which you have, and go forward in that way instead of a deficit-based scenario, which is so beat into our kids' heads, right? And that's because of the housing. That's because of the amount of sidewalk. That's because of the public health. That's because of the education. All of it, again, is just completely inextricably linked. And if we can provide some type of respite through this green stuff and explode that presumption or that assumption, like then we've done our job. And whatever, you go be a nurse or a car mechanic, I don't care. But you've come through that.
Hey, Tanner, I'm gonna, just because it might get lost in the chat, Jessica brought up something that I'm interested in also, and just that sort of long-term tracking and how you sort of measure your impact on these folks long-term. So can you speak to that just a little bit?
And so it's imperfectly, right, and funny through these apps and so forth. But the great thing that we do, and I think that right now is helping us set apart, especially when we talk about fundraising and showing outcomes, is that we're able to pair the environmental metrics with the social again. So we can talk about even site-specific stuff. At this site, we planted X number of trees so-and-so, because of this work, gained these certifications that are directly linked to a potential next job, right? So it's all there contained. And with our kids using GIS, we're able to map some of that and getting better at that. And the GIS itself is a great skill. Again, if you're in the hospital field or what, like the conservation field or whatever. So those are cool ways we're able to intertwine everything. But certainly I think it's imperfect and it's hard for us to get beyond. Like, we employed 100 kids, that's great. Like, what's farther? We have great stories and we have a great pairing of stuff. But quite honestly, I'm still trying to look for a little bit more within the data that we do have access to. And one thing I'm trying to do with that is talk to our Cincinnati Public Schools, because they have a huge cache of all sorts of things, even kids' grade levels. I'd love to see what happens to a kid's grade in one season with the green team, their grades before and after, for example. But there's some hiccups for me to get that data.
Dragonfly students. There you go. Project ideas.
Right.
Really, like,
right.
You gotta have a grad student that wants to measure this stuff.
Yes. It's
great.
perfect grad student thing.
That's great. Jim posted in the chat for you, Tanner, asking about sites in California. So you mentioned there was one in Richmond, California. Is that the only one in California?
Richmond
branch there?
And San Diego as well.
And one of our AIP institutions that we were talking about earlier is in San Diego. So
right on. Yep.
There we go. More connections.
Well, the best one is here in Cincinnati. You all know that, but
why you're here tonight.
Center of the universe, right?
Tanner, we love you, Mackenzie.
Tanner, if I were to reach out to the San Diego one, where is that exactly? How would I contact that?
The easiest way is probably just Google Groundwork USA. They will there's a link there to the network, and they will provide a phone number and email for all of the locations.
Jim, it looks like Mackenzie just put it in the chat.
Oh, there we go.
Oh, thanks, Mackenzie. Great. Awesome.
David, I didn't see you on there. Did you have a question earlier?
Well, it was less a question, Tanner, and more a congratulation. I think the world needs more people like you and all of you on this call. So thank you for all the work you're doing. And if there is a question in that, a real softball, but what gives you hope? What motivates you every day? What gives you hope?
It's an easy part. It's those last slides, and you've heard it before, but it's like when you work with these folks, and I love high schoolers. They're so darn funny, and I always tell them, I don't want to be your parent or your teacher. I want to be your boss. Like, boom, you messed, get your shit together. You messed up. Let's grow and learn together. I was not someone who did well in classes. So taking and reinforcing learning and stuff in the field with projects that are benefiting them in the pocketbook and in their own communities is just that special place for me of learning more than anything. They might not think about it like that, but just to be in, and I don't get to do this much anymore, but to be literally in the weeds with kids and to go on for hours about what Marvel character they would be or whatever, versus some really hard circumstances that they may be dealing with or may not, shows you, again, all this stuff about identity and about presentation of someone is that often we're not that different, and this idea of exchange in some healthy way is so powerful to understand each other and build the empathy of where we're coming from. And there's nobody better than these silly high schoolers, because they're so fun and so smart and they have no idea often. And some of them are way smarter and way more woke than like I'll ever want to be or be. But yeah, that's it. Thank you, David. Yeah, right on, Molly.
So I actually have a question, and it's more about involvement. I know you mentioned that Groundwork is distributed throughout several cities, but what would be a good way to get involved? Or, if an organization wanted to reach out and say, hey, we want to see if we can get this started in our community, what would be the steps for that?
Excellent. Well, thank you for asking, and I'll be transparent as always, but just to say that you all as the Dragonfly program here offer like something special above and beyond probably other groups or people or so forth because of your skill set and because of your passion and the care you have for all the things that we already do as Groundwork. So it's cool to connect with groups like you. I talk to a lot of groups and it's not this fun or safe or whatever, right? Usually. So there's that. You have a specialized skill. I could easily make an introduction to Groundwork USA or something who's kind of like our parent and say, hey, there's this group of captive folks who are talented, smart, and interested in what we do, and see what happens. Because truly at a place like Groundwork, master's projects can be, they can be whatever, a book on the shelf, or they can be really groundbreaking, again, excuse the pun, because you have an understanding of the issues that we face, fundraising, and the duality of all the things we do in the multi-dimensions. So that's cool. And, explore and look at what not just Cincinnati or other ones do. And if you find, because Groundwork Denver, for example, is way different than Groundwork Cincinnati. We all have these conservation, equity, and justice foundations, but their programs are wildly different because they're responding more to the needs of the area. That's why we focus so much on green infrastructure, because the rainfall here, especially climate change, is crazy, right? And then we do have, sometimes it's yearly, sometimes it's less than yearly, open applications for new cities to get some funding to form a cohort and become a Groundwork location. If they go through a pretty extensive feasibility study, and if it's the right fit on both sides, then they get some assistance to start up that Groundwork. And usually it's working with city government and some players and actors there that really see the potential. And often these are some of our biggest allies. Often it's public servants who know the system that they're in and know it's messed up and know that they're not the ones to get things done, but they can have an ally in a Groundwork to make some change, whisper the things that they can't say to the Groundwork or whatever, and they go off and they have a collaborative partnership that way. Perry.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Gabi. And seriously, it'd be cool to work with any of you, of course, but there's all sorts of other Groundwork trusts is what we call ourselves. Perry, do you want to go ahead and see your hand up?
Sorry about that.
Yeah.
So my question was about outreach to students who are younger than high school. Yeah. And do you take advantage, or how would you take advantage of their curiosity, their willingness to act, and then also to carry their ideas home into the community, into their school?
It's a good question. And I actually think of it as like a constructive criticism, right? Because if I'm talking about this gap that we need to fill and we're only dealing with middle school or high schoolers, there's also the young kids. So I usually cop out and say there's plenty of organizations working with young kids.
Yeah.
That is true and not true, but we can probably do more as far as relationships there. And then the other honest thing about it is, like, I don't like working with young kids as much personally. So there's that. But we are making our first foray into young kids this summer with a trail week where we're going to attempt to plan and design trails at school campuses that have large tracts of land associated with them. And the kids love being out there anyway, right? So how can we harness some of their energy? And there's a lot of creativity in science and math and physics into trail building, right? And erosion work, et cetera. So we won't talk about it like that, I imagine. This is not my place of expertise, but we'll get into their heads a little bit, and then most of all, get their hands dirty and do this trail camp, and we'll see how it goes. So I have somewhat of an answer to give you, and thank you for the push there.
I can see the trails being like, doo, doo, doo.
Right. What is this, a trail network for ants,
And it's neat to think about those connections, because each of you work in your own communities that you're working with, and which other ones can you be bringing into that fold. I think is just really neat from what Tanner talked about. I feel like we could probably talk all night, which is great. And Tanner could probably talk all night, because you can tell he just fits it in, since he likes to talk real fast and fit it all in. But I think that offered us a chance to kind of see you as a person, what you do. I mean, you've had a lot of struggles to get to the place that you are. I mean, a lot of the work that you've gone through, you've kind of made look magical, to think about where you are today and the hard times to get to that spot of being able to kind of be the co-executive director. And some of those pieces are just, they come out so well, seeing the work and where you've gone and what you've done. So I think that just gives us such a flavor for for the possibilities of what's out there, how these components are inextricably linked, as you said earlier, that we can't be without them. And so let's just think about it that way. And as soon as we do, and we put all that in the fold, what can it really look like? So I feel like you really helped us to kind of shape that and think about it. It's neat, even in your grad program, you were doing active work, and these folks, that's exactly what everybody on this call has done or is in the midst of doing. So I hope it helps you think about what your projects can be, right? Because sometimes it's pretty easy to just turn to the community to the side next to you. We were talking about this earlier. Why not turn to somebody who actually is a community that you don't know, is a community that you can link up, hey, I've never thought about going this to this part of my neighborhood. And that really can be the place where we can kind of continue to grow a lot of the great work that you all already do. But I think it's neat to think about how to up that ante sort of each time too. So Tanner, thank you so much. All you guys, thank you. Diversify Group for being prepared and making it a great night. Shafkat and Kevin have done a lot to make this cafe series possible. So thanks to you all for joining us. Be sure to come for the next ones. I think we have the dates up somewhere, Kevin. Can you announce what the next one will be while everybody's still here?
Yeah, the next one's, I actually don't have the date right in front of it. It's going to be, I think, the third Thursday of May. Whatever that is, someone will grab it, I'm sure. But and it's going to be from Ginny Bohm from our libraries at Miami is going to talk about equity in academic research and how there's these filters that kind of lead you down finding certain papers and not others, and what we can do to counteract that, and how we can hear from communities we don't normally hear from when we're looking at literature reviews and also publishing in general. So that should be really cool. Yeah.
Great, good. Well, hope to see you all for next time. And thanks so much for being here tonight. Tanner, again, thank you.
Thank you all so
just
much.
make a last minute pitch.
Thanks very much.
For all y'all, especially if you're some sort of underrepresented minority description of some sort, please join the Google form or Diversify group, etc. Just, the more the merrier, because Kevin, Jill, all y'all that are working in the background is making all these cafes and other works possible, but the diversity of inputs make these work more rich, sustainable over the long run, etc. So anyway, I'm done with the spiel. So
Yay.